Hello everyone, thank you very much for clicking on this video, and hopefully you'll stay through to the entire series. What I'm hoping to do here is actually take you from the beginning all the way to the end of a MIM or Microsoft Identity Manager installation. When I first started to look into Identity Manager, I had a hard time finding resources to get what I need to get it even to work properly. So what I'm hoping to do here is actually provide what I would have wanted when I was first learning. So I'm actually going to start from the very beginning. So I'm going to actually start with Server 2016 install, and then I'm going to create an Active Directory. We're going to export out of production, import into our Sandbox, and then go through the Identity Manager prerequisites and actually install the synchronization service and portal. And then a little bit towards the end of the series, I'm hoping that we'll be able to, or I'll be able to show some of the tricks that I've found to massage some of the data that's coming out of your sources. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. The first thing that I want to show you, though, is if you actually jump to the eval center, and if you can't get there, just Google Windows Server 2016, and there's a try now, and that'll bring you right over to Server 2016. You get 180 days. You can download Server 2016 and run the install. You can do that with, I believe they still have 2012 as well. But you can also evaluate other products. So if you want to actually download Identity Manager 2016, you can download that as well. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to be running Hyper-V. So I'm going to go ahead and create me a new virtual machine. And I'm going to name that SB-AD. We're going to first create our Server 2016 AD box. This is going to be our Sandbox machine. We're also going to have our Identity Manager and SharePoint and SQL on this box. Obviously in production you wouldn't want to do this, but this is just for our purposes of learning. So I'm going to actually assign this right now. I'm going to assign it only 4 gigs of memory, and I'm going to use dynamic memory, but I'm going to change some settings here in a second. I'm going to leave the network as not configured, but I am going to restrict the hard drive, the virtual hard disk, down to 75 gigs. I don't like to over provision my hard disks. I actually like to set it to the volumes size that I want it to be, in this case 75 gigs. I don't want to have to worry about over committing resources. And then for the installation options, I'm going to leave that blank because I'm going to go in and change that here in a second. So I'm just going to next and finish. So I'm going to go ahead and click settings on here. So we're going to change some things before we actually boot it up. So I'm going to go into the memory, and I'm going to copy my 4 gigs of RAM into my maximum RAM. Again, I said I don't like to overcommit, so I'm just changing that maximum RAM just so I don't overcommit my actual physical machine's RAM. While I'm around here, I'm going to go ahead and browse. I'm going to change the DVD drive to an image file and browse for my ISO, my Server 2016 ISO. And I have downloaded a lot of ISOs here, so let's get the correct Server 2016 one, and we'll go ahead and open that. And I'm going to remove my network adapter, and I'm going to add a legacy network adapter. And then I'll connect my legacy network adapter to my Sandbox. And then we'll just apply and OK that, or OK that in this instance. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and connect. I like to connect to my virtual machine before I power it on, so that if it's waiting for me to press any key to boot the CD-ROM, I can do that. I can see it. I don't have to wait. Now, I don't have anything on this hard disk, so it's going to go ahead and boot into my CD-ROM. So we'll go ahead and power it on. Okay, so for those of you that haven't seen the 2016 installation yet, it's very, very similar to the 2012 and 2012 R2. There's only really one change. So we get the normal welcome screen to choose our language and time format. So I'm going to say next because everything is correct. And I'm going to say install now. Now here is where we get the difference between the 2012's installs and then the 2016's. So if you remember back in 2012, there was a core installation, and I forget the exact words. Either they said GUI or desktop installation. Well, in 2016, they've removed the wording for core installation. So the Windows Server 2016 standard that I have selected now and the Windows Server 2016 Data Center that's right here, these are the core installations. You will only get the command line when you choose these options. The installation options with desktop experience, these are our GUI installations. And when I first did this install, I didn't read this fully, and I went ahead and chose the standard, and I got the core installation. So, but for our Sandbox, since we're going to have almost everything with the Identity Manager in here, I want the GUI installation. So I'm going to choose that and choose next. And then I'll accept the terms. And then we'll do a custom install Windows only. And unless you're doing this on a physical machine that requires drivers, or you choose different settings in your virtual machine, you shouldn't need to load any drivers. So I don't need to. So I'm just going to click next and let it create the volume for me. And we're off on the install. So while it's installing, I'm going to give a little bit of background into what Forefront Identity Manager is. And I keep saying Forefront Identity Manager. It's Microsoft Identity Manager now. So the latest version is Microsoft Identity Manager with Service Pack 1. And I believe there are a couple of hot fixes. And we'll go through installing those as well. Okay, so I had to look this up just to make sure I got my dates and things correct. So there's Microsoft Identity Manager, then there was Forefront Identity Manager. Before that, it was called Identity Lifecycle Manager. That was back in 2007. And in 2003, there was Microsoft Identity Integration Server. Out of all of those names, I like Identity Lifecycle Manager the best because I think that most describes what this product is. It manages identities throughout their life cycles. So from the very beginning of creation, the provisioning portion, changing passwords, providing group access or privileges access. And there's something that was just introduced in the latest version, the privileged access management, where a user can say, hey, I need more privileges to do this certain function, and they are automatically given that based upon your workflow. And then once that function is complete, they're reduced back down to their base set of privileges. So, and then the final, at the end of the life cycle, there's the disabling or revoking access when a identity has been removed. Inside of there, identities range, they include certificates, with smart cards and things of that nature. So this product it has ways of handling that provisioning and deprovisioning. And as we're getting to the actual finishing up the setup on the actual Sandbox machine, the last thing that I want to say about the product is it also enables self-service for users. In FIM 2010 and 2010 R2, there was a self-service password reset that users could go if they had forgotten their password and answer certain questions. Microsoft has extended that in the latest Identity Manager and have added a component with Azure so that they can receive a text or they can receive a phone call to validate that, yes, this is the person, rather than, or in addition to those question and answer gate. So let's go ahead and jump back into our setup here. Now it's asking for what this password should be for our administrator account, and I'll go ahead and set that. ABC123. Do you have those users, or maybe you do it yourself? I do it on occasion. That'll kind of say their password to themselves while they type it in. I just think that's funny. So we'll go ahead and hit Alt-Control-Delete, and as you notice, that was a really quick install. If you already haven't noticed as well, this looks like Windows 10. So I didn't by accident choose the Windows 10 install CD. The Server 2016 actually has the GUI of Windows 10, so don't let that scare you. Just as we quickly had the install here, that kind of preemptively, that's a precursor or foreshadowing as to how they've changed Server 2016. So they've taken the quickness, or they've improved the GUI. They've improved the speed of the GUI. They improve performance of the actual OS itself. And you can see, or I can see that in loading of Server Manager. I've always had trouble loading Server Manager when it first logs in. I've always disabled it because it takes too long. Well, this is actually, they've actually sped it up. They've done a good job in the performance of it. So once you get used to the GUI of Windows 10/2016, I think you'll be okay with all the other features because of the performance. So what I like to do, and what we're going to go ahead and do, is jump down to the local server here, and I'm going to run through this second set of features in reverse. So in the time zone, I'm going to jump through and set my local time zone here. So I'm -5 UTC. We're in Eastern. And I'm going to go ahead and, since this is a sandbox mode, I'm going to turn off the Internet Explorer Enhanced Security. I'm going to go ahead and click on Ethernet because I'm going to right-click and rename, or you can press F2. I'm going to call this Sandbox. Especially in virtual machines, I like to name what I have the NIC connected to inside of Windows here. So I'm going to name that Sandbox. I even do that on physical machines. So if it's connected to port GE 1.1, I will name that GE 1.1 because Windows doesn't have a CDP or see which port this is plugged in. Sometimes it's just nice to have that info. So I'm going to go ahead a little further here and configure the properties on here. I'm going to turn off IPv6 just to minimize the amount of traffic I have going across. And I'm going to edit the IP on this machine here. So I'm going to give it a 192 range. And I'm just going to give it 10. I'm going to leave the default subnet mask. And I'm not going to give it a gateway, but I will type in its IP address for the DNS server. So remember, we're going to make this an Active Directory server or Active Directory domain controller. And we need DNS to actually have a domain services installation. So I'm going to OK through that. OK through this next screen and close that out. And I'm going to close out our network connection screen. On the Windows firewall, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the Windows firewall. And then we'll say OK. Just for the ease, you can configure, and I believe the installation for Identity Manager does prompt for firewall, but the installation is not the hard part for Identity Manager. I believe the configuration of the management agents is where starting to get hard. So I'm not going to worry about showing you in depth of how to config because that's basically a wizard. I mean, how to install because that's basically a wizard. So I'm not too worried about making sure the Windows firewall or showing you about the Windows firewall. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the computer name. I'm going to call it SB-AD again. And then I'm going to say OK. And then it says, hey, you need to restart there, bud. I'll go ahead and do that. I'll close it. And I'm not going to restart. I'm actually going to shut this virtual machine down. For some reason, I had an issue with this virtual machine. I think it's something where the ISO is stored. It won't let me dismount my image file while the virtual machine's running. So we'll just power that on. I didn't like to see the press any key to load the CD-ROM installation. Okay, so now let's back up. We're going to log in. So the final thing that we're going to do in this video is we're actually going to manage, add, remove roles and features, and we're going to actually install the Active Directory Domain Services role. So it's just giving us a little before you begin. I'm going to say next. The installation type is going to be a role or feature based. And then it'll automatically choose this local server. And then I'm going to check Active Directory Domain Services. And it's going to come up and it's going to ask us, would you like to install these management tools? And yes, I would. So I'll just say add these features. Then I'll say next. We're not going to add any additional features, but I will say next. And this is just saying, hey, if you're installing a domain controller, you may want to have a minimum of 2 domain controllers. And Domain Directory Services requires a DNS server. If it's not one installed, it will install it for you. But if there is one installed, you may have to do some manual installation. Now, if this is if I were to do this in production, I would read this, I would plan, I would be very thorough because I wouldn't want to have to do this multiple times. I want to get it right the first time because it's very rare that you would install a domain controller. So we'll just say next, and I am going to confirm this and install. So let me talk a little bit about, so this video is just going to be on the installation and promoting this. This domain controller. The next video, I'm going to actually, since we will have AD installed, I want to actually show you how to export from your production environment and then import into this Sandbox environment. I think it's very important to do that because you won't want to do an install of Identity Manager and go straight into tying it into your production environment, because the first time that I did an installation of Identity Manager, I did it in Sandbox, but I deleted all of my Sandbox organizational units, all of my Sandbox accounts, because I didn't have the configuration set up properly. So this is very important that you test your configuration. It's also important, I think, to actually have accounts that you can recognize from your production environment, because, you know, having test account 1, test account 2, test account 3, that may not make sense to you when you're browsing and trying to make sure your configuration is set up correctly. So the installation is actually complete here. So it actually saying promote this server to a domain controller. So let's go ahead and click on that, and we'll do that. So we are going to add a new forest, and the root domain is going to be sandbox.local. And then we'll say next. Then it's going to go through, okay, what do we want our forest and domain functional levels to be? In Server 2016, they still have the functional levels named as Windows Server Technical Preview. So that's what I'm going to choose. And then it's asking, what do I want this domain controller to have the capability of doing? Well, I want it to be a DNS server, yes. And then the very first domain controller that you have in your forest has to be a global catalog server. The very first domain controller that you have in your forest cannot be a read-only domain controller. Now we're going to type in our Active Directory restore mode password. And I'm trying not to say it as I go, even though it's ABC123. This is just saying, I have the, if you remember a few minutes ago, I configured a DNS server in my IP properties. Well, what just happened here was if I can speak, what just happened here is the promotion wizard queried 192.168.1.10, and it said, is there an authoritative parent zone for sandbox.local? And of course, no, there isn't, because the .10 is this local VM, DNS server is not installed. So that's just what this little warning is saying. So I'm going to say next. Now, while it's looking at the NetBIOS domain name, if we did have a valid DNS server in there, it would have said something to the effect, well, the parent zone is not there. Would you like me to create it for you? That was what that checkbox was for. So our DNS, or excuse me, our NetBIOS domain name is going to be Sandbox. Now, if I were to do this on a production machine, I would think heavily about having these, the database and log files and the sysvol folders on different disks. And that might just be me, but it also depends on your security policies and your backup procedures. But I would think heavily about separating that just for an ease of backup, and could possibly be a security measure as well. But I would think heavily about moving those. So we get a review options here that just tells us, okay, this is everything that you had chosen in this wizard. Now, if you click the view script, it actually gives you a PowerShell script for exactly what that wizard did. So I'm going to say next. And it's just running through some of the prerequisites. Now we're going to get an error about a cryptography. This is always fun to say, a cryptography algorithm that 2016 has. And here it is, the very first thing. So basically, a 2016 domain controller prevents it. It only wants secure algorithms. So some older versions of Windows might have trouble establishing a secure channel section or session. So I would definitely read this KB article if you're serious about upgrading your domain controllers in production. But that's just something else that has changed with Server 2016. So everything, all the checks completed and they passed successfully. Had a couple warnings, but we'll just go ahead and say install. So now the install's kicking off, and it'll take a little bit. What it's going to do is reboot the domain controller is what it will be when it reboots. And then we'll be able to actually log in with our domain account. So I'm going to leave this video here. I'm going to try and keep these around this same time. But I want to get as much information in there as possible so that you'll be able to take a step and take another step. You may not have a fast machine as I do, and it may take you longer to install. So I'm hoping that these videos will be good. Hoping the timing will be right. What I'm also going to try and do, I'm going to try and get most of this series up at once, just in case you're ready to move on to the next step, because I don't want you to have to wait if you're actually sitting for a project. So I'm going to try and get as much in so that you can get going yourself and play around yourself without waiting on me to upload more videos. But again, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave me comments about what you liked and what you'd like to see less of. Be nice. It's my first time. But if you like the video, please give me that little thumbs up. Otherwise, stay tuned in the next video where we're going to actually be importing and exporting, and we might even start to get the prerequisites installed for Identity Manager. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.